Jennifer, some things haven't changed. We always record after the fact. Let me see if I can get this to work. Whoops. All right, it's not working. I'll just read. So Keith, in the scenario you're talking about, you would still, let's say live peers, the scenario grant, we get, $30,000. You'd still want to be the builder on that. You just don't want to do the admin part, right? Or do you not want to participate at all?
Yeah, no, on the just the acquiring of the grant, because I don't know, I almost feel like there should be a baked in like hourly rate or something that the person who like does the proposal and like does the legwork to get the grant should be at least compensated for that. But then there's also like this, the traditional like sales incentive route of like, well, if you get like a percentage, then you're then it becomes like more motivating to like go out and find more grants or something. So I don't know. I'm not getting behind any of these things. That's just what comes to mind.
Yeah. So what I was thinking, kind of with that in mind, Eric, if you want to scroll down just a little bit, basically, so that first one that I wrote was with that live peer in mind. So 20%, and these percentages are just, again, out of thin air. 20% would go to the treasury. 20% would be the project manager admin. That person would probably also just naturally be the grant writer. They'd also be the liaison between the grant itself and their committee. And then they would be the one seeing it through to completion. Then the builders, depending on how many builders are needing, again, this depends on scope. Builders will get the largest chunks. And then if bounties are needed because it's a bigger grant, then that would be a smaller percentage as well. And then for something smaller, it's just less team involved. So treasury still gets a percentage, PM admin gets a percentage, and then builder, researcher, whatever would get a large chunk. So that the labor itself is the highest compensated part. And it just kind of seems logical. That way, the PM and the admin, the project manager, admin person or whatever, if they stumble onto a grant and they're like, yeah, let's do it, but I don't want to be the one building it, then they get that percentage. But then the builder's like, hey, this is a great grant. Does somebody want to be the, herder of the grant, project manager? Or if that person wants to do both, and, we can have that conversation too. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so the idea is that this is like basically guidelines, right? Because obviously like the particular numbers and structure, like there might be different specifics for every.
Totally.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like a couple of like ways to approach, particularly like what Keith was saying about, like normally you'd have like a development person that's like, getting paid on the front end, or it just is their job to, seek these out and write the grant, and maybe they're not necessarily like administering the grant, but yeah, usually there's like some compensation for the actual grant writing somehow. Like we haven't really had the funds to do that, obviously, so there's like a couple ways to approach that. One could be, we could do that maybe. I mean, there is like about $10,000 in the treasury, although a lot of that's, but some of that's earmarked for stuff. I mean, there could be like, some like grant writing stipends, we could offer that, like to get more grant writing off the ground. Or the other way to approach it is basically the person who plans to be the program manager or the admin writes the grant, and so that's that's kind of how you end up getting paid for it. It's still really, in that model, amounts to free labor, because you're not getting paid for those particular hours writing the grant, but you are at least like designing your own gig for.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and honestly, like the grant stuff that I've been involved with in Web3, these are not like complicated grants. So it's not like a big, like if we were talking about nonprofit, it's a different conversation. So like I can write a for unlock in probably under 2 hours, honestly. And most Web3 protocols or whatever, they want short and sweet grants. They don't want anything complicated. And because we are such a small group now, it just kind of seemed logical to do it this way. This would change as we grow, where we could have that dedicated grant researcher writer, and then it's handed over to a PM to shepherd it the rest of the way through, so that one grant writer can just focus on that one thing. But since it's just us right now and we're finding these grants and they're not like the ones for Live Peer, I haven't really looked at their application process deeply, but I looked at the back and forth and how they, said what they needed, how they approved, how they would talk about ongoing funds. It did not look complicated at all. It's just kind of like, yes, you sound intelligent. Yes, this is a good idea. Like, that's pretty basic. I've seen some of the grants that unlocked that we approved, and it was basically like 2 sentences. I was like, are you kidding me? So.
Yeah, I mean, like in the traditional nonprofit world, which we're gonna have to get into my experience there, but if we were to take this approach, like in the traditional nonprofit world, as like our sole, like funding all of this through like piecemealing grants together, it would kind of be like building our own prison.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it is a bit different in Web3, like, just like so far, I mean, all the grants so far have been very low touch. So, I mean, it's not, I'm still kind of with Keith in that, like, it's not like the ideal approach to
No, it's
funding
definitely not.
ourselves, but it is better than the current approach, which,
Right.
so, until something better comes along, like, I think it's a pretty feasible approach because of how much is out there and how relatively easy it is, like you're saying, Crystal. Yeah, it just takes a little bit more on the front end.
Yeah. And I'm going to be exposed to a lot of grants here soon through WAGMI. So I'd like to know something like this in place for us, so I can kick it over to us when I find something that fits what we're doing. So that we can move it through faster and just really get us to the point until we're funded. Like, I still also want to stand up. I'm still going to bug John Cusack and all of the people with money. I'm still doing the angel thing. Like, we're going to hound on all the doors, but I also don't want us to lose momentum because there's nothing to sustain us,
No, this is awesome. Now that I'm thinking about it, it might even be like, I think there's a hidden benefit in having the project manager be like the kind of proposal writer, in that I think you get into trouble when you have like a separate person who's just writing grants, and their kind of like internal sense of success, if not like a actual KPI, is just kind of like dollar amounts or whatever. So they're like signing up the team for like all this stuff that like the team doesn't really want to work on or whatever, and they're just like, and they're not being consulted along the process. So I think it might be good actually to have some like some connection there, rather than just getting somebody specialized in grant writing, because then it's like maybe the volume goes up, but then like there's all these externalities that creep in.
Yeah, because one thing Web3 does, not everybody requires this with their grants, but a lot of they're going to want to be able to like talk with the actual grant, the people that gave the grant. Like, the PM is also going to need to be able to articulate what's going on, and they should also be that grant writer too, because it's just then they can fluidly talk about the thing all the way through to the end and communicate with the people giving the grant. So that also opens the door for more funding. I mean, it's all about that open communication. If you can keep that open, then you keep the door open for additional funding once the grant is complete.
Yeah, and it might be interesting, like the kinds of grants that this like indicates that we shouldn't pursue, like it's kind of, you start out and you're just like, any funding is great, like let's just go after this and this and this, and then you get bruised up, and then you come to something more like this. And so it might be good to force those conversations of like, okay, is this actually what we want to be doing? Is this money worth it? Because I'm seeing where the money comes from can be kind of a distraction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, these definitely will change based on the grants themselves, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
That's awesome, because I wasn't really thinking, I wasn't getting detailed in my thoughts here.
I think it might still be. I think it might be annoying, like still in the beginning, like just like even thinking of the one smaller grant that we have. It's like the the deliverables there versus like the funding. It's like um it's like a bit of an investment in time just to get those deliverables out the door. But then I think like as we scale up, I think that becomes more and more viable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and this might not apply to the grant because this is after the grant. So it just might not fit into like the Ocean Protocol grant.
Mhm.
So you might just have to chunk that out as bounties and then just push it out. And then everything moving forward could fall into this framework because we would design the application around the framework itself too.
Got it. Okay.
So I think we're kind of still winging the ocean grant, which we're good at.
Yeah, and I think for that I was gonna propose that we just kind of do the same like task force that we did with JournoDAO, just kind of a
Yeah.
separate group. Like that seems to be the
Mhm.
best way to go forward.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah, if you need help on that, I can help with that. But I also want to leave it open to other people too. So whatever.
Welcome, John. You're probably at work, but hello.
Hey, John.
And I last minute put on to the agenda just to bring up the streamer like Ukraine DAO grant. And I think there's so many things going on with that over the summer and everything, but I think we should revisit that and actually like from my perspective, I was waiting for a streamer to release their new marketplace, because if you remember, we got the page up and everything where you could like get access to our Twitter account, but then if you actually went to the marketplace like site, it said like come back later when we have a new marketplace.
Yeah.
So whatever, they put that up, so I think it's time to revisit that, maybe do a post about what we built and maybe even do some outreach ourselves to find some guinea pig journalists and then maybe adapt it to Mastodon, even since we're kind of in that direction.
So instead of using Mastodon instead of Twitter for the feed, you mean?
Yeah, or add that as an option. Like, since we've done the Twitter thing, we could just add like a Mastodon integration. Could be either or they could feed each other. You could add your Twitter account or your Mastodon account, and it would just go into one feed. But nothing to be done. I just wanted to like surface that again because I got lost.
Yeah. Is there anything to help with on that front besides like writing a post when it's time?
I think like the outreach and stuff, and since that was like, I think we should potentially pay somebody like the grant money that was given to go and do that outreach and like onboard actual journalists or get some user testing, and something that we can, in my mind, we could do a public post, but then we could also like deliver something to streamer about like some user research as far as like the feedback we got, what journalists would need to have in place if it's too high friction, like how could it on the platform level, what could they do to make that better, that sort of thing.
And were we still at a point where, so like I remember leaving it at like the UI wasn't really there, right? Because it was like the feed was just kind of like a stream of code.
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
that still the case? Like, do we need to Does that need to be built out before onboarding the journalists or no?
I assume that's similar, but I don't know because they've done a lot of work on their end. So TBD on that. But yeah, I forgot about the front end stuff, but that would be something that we could maybe go to them as like an additional effort if they wanted. But I think we should get input from more than one like external journalist as far as what they would want to see before we kind of like guess too much about what we got to present to them to make them interested at all.
Yeah, and I also, I mean, I guess we, you know, we kind of have made the agreement with the Ukraine people, but it like introduces this like level of complexity of finding the right kind of journalist, and they also are in Ukraine, and they also are like have an interest in, you know, these kind of like alternate publishing models. It kind of feels like looking for a unicorn now, but I wonder if there's like you know, some other folks that are, I don't know, just like kind of in like the web3 publishing sphere already that could be part of that round of outreach to check it out.
Yeah, I think lifting the Ukraine limitation can get us moving forward because that was like a big just head scratcher, and we, you know, there's like 4 or 5 consecutive weeks where we tried to like figure out what was going on, and that just kind of killed the momentum. So I think if we just make it more generalized, and now we have like the whole Twitter Mastodon thing going on, and I think that's like a conversation that we could tap into again. I don't know, it just feels like it made sense that it kind of fizzled, but now it makes sense to like bring it back.
I had to run, guys.
See ya.
Okay, bye, Crystal.
Have you found like the Mastodon, like a cool Mastodon community of like people that would be like-minded with this group? I've done like very little exploration.
Not really. I mean, I'm just kind of like following everybody on there because then that's how you see more like interesting things, and then you can like mute or unfollow people or streams or whatever if it's not what you want. But I think people are still figuring it out, and with like the hundreds of thousands of people kind of flooding in and going to all these different servers, I haven't really identified a hashtag or a server or a community yet that's, I think there's JournoDAO, which I think we should just reach out to. I think Crystal applied. I don't know if she got into their server, but there's a few like journalism specific Mastodon servers that will probably have the same distribution of Web3 skepticism as just your average journalism crew. Hopefully not as much, since they're into like federated. They've at least taken the leap to federated decentralization. But yeah, I think it will materialize at some point. Like I think norms are being created like as we speak. It's very much like 2009 Twitter or 2010 Twitter or something, where it's like, I was reminded they didn't even used to have like the app mentions, right? That's just like a convention that people came up with and they codified it into the features.
Did that reporter ever get in touch with you?
Which one? Oh no, the one that you were talking about.
From like Friday?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a pretty robust discussion in that Slack about Mastodon. And there's, you know, the guy that I gave your contact info seems pretty well versed. But everyone else who's just like kind of trying it out is very frustrated with it. Including like some real veteran like open source reporters. And it's kind of funny, like, like are the features different like across different servers? Like it shouldn't be that way, right? Because like there were people are having different experiences, like just in terms of how visible other users were on different servers, and like how actually maybe not, maybe I'm remembering this wrong now. But anyway, yeah, I'd say it's a mix of interest and frustration.
Yeah, and I think it will slowly become apparent like what's actually a valid criticism against Mastodon, and then what is really just like learning something new. Like,
Yeah,
I mean, at Wired we had to change like content management systems like maybe 5 or 6 times, and before the change it was like how terrible this existing one was, and like, oh, anything would be better than this. And then it's like day one of the new thing, and it's just like, oh my god, the old one was so much better than this. It's like, how do I even do this? And then or even like at Facebook when they just change like minor UI things, and this is more significant than like a minor UI change. So it's I think there's probably people there who are pointing out like things that will last and need to be addressed, but I think it's really hard right now just to parse what people will get used to and what they won't.
right. I mean, I've just had a hard time working it into my workflow, but I'm putting it on it's working its way onto the to-do list now.
Well, I mean, I think all of our brains are trying to decide if this is like worth it or not, and then when I see like Adam Davidson go over there, or like more and more people, when you do like the debirdify, like finding your followers who have Mastodon addresses, like more and more people are there each day. I can totally see. I don't know if it's crossed that point yet or if it will cross that point, but it's making me see how if people do keep going over, that it would just suddenly be valuable just because everybody's there. And right now, since nobody's there, all the discussion is about like what's different, the UI, like another thing. I have to do Twitter and this over here, and it's just like an extra mental burden and whatever. And like that's all valid, but it's not. It can all change if just like enough people go over there.
Yeah, I don't know what call it was on, or if you were on it. Like maybe it was the Republic one, I don't know, but about like as a journalist, like I actually like I read Twitter like way more than I post to it or engage with it. And I'm like kind of 2 or 3 times a day just scrolling through like tons of tweets from scientists and different agencies and whatever. And like I'm going to continue doing that for the foreseeable future, but I have noticed there's been like a little trickle of those accounts that are like, yeah, now we're moving over to Mastodon. None have said none have said we're moving to Mastodon, but some are like, yeah, we're on Mastodon now too. But none have totally jumped ship from Twitter. So like, I mean, for the foreseeable future, for the way that I use it, it's hard to see it going away until that exodus becomes just like a flood, which could happen.
Yeah, and so I'm not like kind of riding the fence of like recommending that people try it out and like open their mind to like that being on the horizon, and like even if it's not Mastodon, considering just what your relationship to like social media and like public communication would be if it wasn't completely defined and controlled by Twitter. Um, but I'm not at all expecting that anyone can just like swap out Twitter with Mastodon and then have a good day and like, find it's like moving into a new house and none of your stuff is moved there yet. And then, you bring in a desk and you're like, okay, well, I could work here for a little bit, but then I don't have like my bookshelf or like my printer and all this stuff. And it's like until all that stuff is there and you've kind of gotten comfortable on a new platform and all that, it's just going to be extra work, and it's not going to provide you the same things that Twitter does right now.
Yeah, I'm kind of a boomer with with new platforms too. It's like, I mean, we're doing this on Zoom, right? So, but yeah, if you force my hand, I'll figure it out.
Well, I'm not the one who is going to force you, and I wouldn't want anyone to go over there because I was like berating them to do it. But I think it's interesting as is now. It is extra work for me. I'm just kind of like interested to see this thing like evolve, and not personally like getting like value out of it for the same reasons that I get value out of Twitter. But I do have this like spidey sense that it or something like it is around the corner, and that the future is going to have less and less Twitter and Facebook in it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you there. I will say I expected this transition, the Elon transition, to be chaotic, and he has managed to exceed my expectations.
Oh yeah, so much better than I thought. Chaos factor.
Well, do we want to talk at all about the decentralized reporting and like incentives for that? Is that anything you have any interest, or any of the other folks here have any interest in diving into? That's kind of the only other thing I had on the agenda. Or we could just talk about FTX all day long.
I'm interested in talking about it. I'm not sure. I always like to get things to like a actionable next step, and so I don't know if we're there yet with it, or if we're still kind of
No,
ideating on it.
yeah, no, I don't think we're there yet. I mean, I know I'm not there yet. I haven't been able to, been like marinating, but I've been able to like sit down and write out like a potential idea for a structure. And I mean, my initial thought was to just like kind of, do like to kind of like throw open the doors and say like this is something that we're even to Solana. This is something that we're interested in doing, and we want to do this reporting on this topic that everyone has exposure to in a decentralized way, and to actually just kind of open it up to suggestions and contributions to like kind of the wider Web3 universe at first, and just see if anything comes back. But then also in parallel, we could be having a discussion of like something more structured and what like incentives could look like in terms of, are we rewarding contributors with like some sort of NFT or tokens or something else? Yeah, I think those are the conversations to have.
Well, I get the sense, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about planning for like the rest of the year is like, you don't have a lot of time to put into it though right now, do you? Or is this something like if we did operationalize it that you would want to dive into it?
Good question. Yeah, I mean, the hope would be that, there's enough interest and enough people contributing that, yeah, I mean, I can just kind of help steer things, but yeah, like I definitely can't like, be like editing, like some massive like collaborative thing all on my own, and I don't think we would get that far by the end of the year anyway.
Well, it
Like
just
I have,
takes work to like do what you said, even to like get it off the ground and get some sort of message out to people of like what it is and what we're looking for and all that stuff. Like that's not an insignificant, just like, fire off a blog post in an hour or something.
so yeah, I guess what I would say is like everything I just described, like the actual like outreach of, throwing it out there and asking people to contribute, and then also like having some idea of a structure in place. I don't see that happening before the end of the year. I guess I should say that. I don't think it would make any sense to like kick off like, yeah, we're going to do this big reporting project that you can contribute to. Like it wouldn't make sense to ask for contributions like before January 1st, because it's just a terrible time of the year to start something like that anyway. But we could kind of like start having, like, I'm assuming like this call with Doing Good tomorrow, like maybe like, we'll discuss it there, in some form, and we can kind of continue to have those conversations and conversations like this internally about, how to go about this. Like, are we just talking about like basically asking people to submit stories and photos and whatever else, in exchange for NFTs and tokens? Is it like that simple, or can we come up with like a more like involved structure and workflow, or like those just kind of basic conversations of what this actually looks like? I think like between now and January could be the good time to have those discussions.
Yeah, for sure. I actually think we should try and rope in David Cohn specifically, because I think it was about us that he was involved in.
Oh God, I
on
remember
a great.
Oh, so you mean spot.us, right?
Spot, yeah,
Yeah.
spot.us. And so he'll have like a lot of do's and don'ts, I think, left over from that. Be interesting to hear what worked, what didn't, why ultimately, we had to move on and it's not around today, that sort of thing. Like, does he think it could work today? How do Web3 like tokens and everything make it easier or harder to incentivize people? And so I think for me, if I was participating, I would make it exciting is not just submitting my story, but having some sort of like input or say on how the story develops. And I know I think like decentralizing, but also like keeping like a quality control on it would be an interesting thing to explore. And if we can like get a best practices out of that, I think that's going to keep coming up again and again. Like, okay, we're trying to get input and work from a wide range of people. but then how do we keep that from just being a bunch of noise while also letting people participate? So
yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting opportunity to like integrate all the different like ideas that we've been talking about. So like yeah, maybe like contributions for tokens is like the place to start conceptually, but like ideally it should be like we're also experimenting with decentralizing the editorial process, and what does that look like, and you know, how much, like you're saying, how much like influence and decision making power can the contributors and the audience have in the process? How do we structure that? Like, what is manageable? You guys must think that I just like live in a pile of shit because there's always a fly on every one of these calls. Um, um, and then
I assumed
also
it was a Zoom filter that you just turned on.
my lord of filter is turned on. Um, uh, but yeah, so it's like, yeah, it's not just the like decentralized contribution, but how do we also integrate the decentralized editorial and decision making? And then also like it would be great to try to have a component that of, you know, putting stuff on chain and testing out the like on chain fact checking stuff, and like all this, you know, like bringing all these different components that like you could do them on their own separately using different tools, but it would be cool to bring them all together. This is kind of why I've still like the like Polkadot Edgeware parachain model is like I can't fully grasp it and like what it would look like, but it's like that seems like the direction where, or Cosmos is another one where you know, this we could kind of try playing with all of this in one sandbox, but like figuring all that out seems like a lot.
Yeah, and on that front, it might be interesting to pick the brain of is it Kin, who we met at ONA?
Mm-hmm.
Since you know he's doing this stuff on a daily basis, and I think he is in the Cosmos ecosystem, and yeah, it does seem like an app specific or organization specific chain is kind of where we're headed. We don't need it now, but ultimately, like that's where things are going to land as we like start to decentralize like content and editorial. So yeah, it'd be nice to get like him and David Cohn in a conversation and be like, you know, your expertise plus your expertise is kind of like what we're trying to meld here.
I have this like absurd like a to-do list within my to-do list where it's like I have a list. So I have a list of things just to explore when I have the time, which hasn't happened lately. The like things, here's the list of things to explore: Polkadot, Edgeware, Cosmos, Near, Lens, Radical, like all these different ecosystems where I'm like, I like kind of like understand like what they are, but like when you like dig into the ecosystem and see like what people have already built, where like, I mean, Litecoin is basically like Mirror in the Cosmos ecosystem, but it's like more dynamic, seems to have higher adoption and usage. It's just that it's all people in Hong Kong and Taiwan, you know? So it's like kind of already built. I mean, this is from like looking at it for like one day. But it's crazy. There's like all these other ecosystems like could work, but then it's just kind of like, what is the adoption here? And yeah, I don't know. It's a lot to sort through.
Yeah, I think the ecosystems are a little bit of a distraction as far as trying to fit what they're doing into like what we need when we don't really know exactly what we need. I think just following these lines of inquiry more and actually trying to run these experiments like you were saying, I think it'll be clear which, if any, like technology fits into the right hole that we need, because we can see it more clearly. Where like we're trying to look at some of these chains and be like, that might be our problem that they're solving, but I don't know.
Right, yeah, I hear you. Like finding the tool to, or fitting the problem to the tool rather than the other way around, yeah.
But I think, finding mission alignment with an ecosystem and grant funding and stuff is still a good idea. And hopefully they wouldn't think that like they have the exact right thing for us, but would just want to like incentivize us to um, pressure test their stuff. And also, they like our mission or whatever. So I think that's a good reason to explore some of these ecosystems, but I don't think we've evolved our operation ideas enough to really say that like one is better than the other.
So I don't know that does much towards getting us actionable next steps like that. I mean, the actual next step I think has felt like, for me, it's to like sit down and write something like a blog post, just kind of like outlining kind of what I've been saying here, but in a way that is more concrete and something that we could move forward with. Like that's where it's been sitting the last couple of weeks. And there's weirdly just been like a parade of like my family like decided that November was the month to come to New Mexico. So that's actually what's been going on.
I don't know. I think talking to David Cohn and Kin are like solid next steps. Unless like if you feel like you see all the pieces and it makes sense just to put it on paper, then I'd say yeah, do the blog post. But if you feel like there's still some mysteries out there that they might have the answer to, then it might be worth talking to them.
I guess I would think the writing it out would direct the conversation more than the conversation would direct the. I'm trying to think what that conversation would look like right now. Spot.us was kind of like a local. It was a local news thing, right? It was so long ago.
Yeah, from what I remember, journalists would kind of pitch a story to just the community, and then the community they'd propose a budget, and then it was kind of like a crowdfunding, like vote for it was like a mix of like Kickstarter and journalism sort of thing. It's like Kickstarter, but all the projects are like investigative news stories. So it'd be like, I want to write about the contamination in this area of the city. I need $800 to like do the story. If anyone in that area or not is interested in it, but I think there was a local component as far as marketing and just telling people about it, but I think it was national, and it's like you could browse projects from all over.
It has a Wikipedia page, and there's Dave right there. Right. Okay. This is what our Spot.us originally focused on projects in the San Francisco Bay Area. This is what I have a distinct memory of, is like being excited about it and then being like, and then it like never expanded to the point where
Mm,
I was able to contribute to it.
I was in the bubble, so I didn't realize it was limited.
Yeah, it expanded to Los Angeles in 2009, but then it didn't last much longer than that. Interesting.
I might have a question actually, but it kind of relates to FTX. So I don't know if you guys already covered that early on in the call or not.
Go for it.
No, we're saving it for you.
Oh my God, thank you. I'm kind of interested in the marketing companies that have been leaking information about their competitors to try to discredit them. I do think that's part of what was going on with FTX and Alameda Research. It's been going on for months. Like some of the Twitter accounts have been popping up that are releasing information strategically to damage those people and those platforms. Like I do think it's a cross between marketing and journalism, and it's kind of what I see gap filling right now, because there is no real. I mean, the closest I've seen to investigative journalists covering this stuff is two guys at CoinDesk named Angus Berwick, and I forget the other guy's name, but they've been releasing stories about Binance for months. They just released a story about Binance letting Iran exchanges trade on Binance's platform, and I'm in contact with them, but I don't see anybody else really doing stories about all of these platforms kind of fighting it out through, like dirty marketing tricks on Twitter.
So the marketing firms are working for the exchanges, you mean?
I have no idea who they're working for, but I would assume at least some of them are, because that's kind of the traditional way to do it. One I think about is Dirty Bubble Media. He's one of the people that was asking questions about FTX's liquidity. But a lot of these guys are like either legitimate on-chain investigative people who do other types of market analysis, and some of them are just marketing companies masquerading as legit people. But they co-opt both types of people and have them release content by either leaking it to them or by owning the account that they're leaking the information on.
It's a really interesting model to actually generate conversation. I don't know. I mean, it's like if you knew something and then Eric and Keith were doing a podcast and they started asking or bringing up some of these topics that are stirring the pot and leaking information, which makes Keith and Eric either seem like absolute experts or inside knowledge people. I mean, it's a really interesting strategy, but it's also maybe, are they doing it for the good of the people to try to like let people know to be warned? Or are they doing it because they're actually just trying to get more media attention? Or how is it, or just manipulate the media?
Well, I mean, it's kind of since traditional media has shifted to, the way that the internet's allowed people to kind of co-opt journalism more and use it like an information laundering service machine. I'm saying this kind of badly, but the idea is to, tip off journalists to things that are either half true or fully true that they wouldn't otherwise have, and then they just promiscuously accept tips and release it, and buffer any consequences. So I do think in the case of Binance doing that, it would make sense for them if they were trying to buy FTX, or if that deal wasn't concrete, it would make sense to weaken FTX's position to kind of force them into making a deal with them. I don't know that that's what happened. I really don't, but I would think I see this all the time. It's hard to put the pieces together and see what's going on until you kind of see how the marketing teams are shifting the narrative about it to fit some kind of, like, hey, what's going on with FTX's liquidity? I didn't think there was anything going on there at all. And now, a couple days later, oh, Binance is kind of saving them and buying out a significant amount of control in the company. So I had no notion that was going to happen.
Like, you didn't hear all of the reports about how the founders are like trying to get their bit license and like doing things that aren't necessarily aligned with decentralization. Did you hear any of that last month, or that was probably part of the marketing narrative, right?
I hadn't heard much about that. What I had heard was what I've been looking at from a macro scale is that Binance, which is kind of an Asia-based company, is dealing with other problems relating to, like, you know, them skirting regulation, trying to capture markets that U.S. government doesn't particularly like. And FTX is one of the counterpoints to Binance because they're a direct competitor and they're more friendly to U.S. regulations. They're also based in the U.S. So FTX is more U.S. government friendly company practices, if you will. So, like, you know, SBF has been sitting in on meetings with U.S. senators talking about how to build that regulatory framework. Binance is not sitting in on those meetings at the same capacity. They're not being listened to because they're a foreign-based competitor to U.S. regulators. That's what I know. So them buying out one of the competitors.
Yeah, I mean, it was it was like, okay, this is, I mean, FTX seemed like one of the whales that was safe because they were the angel swooping in when Celsius and everything else was falling apart, right? And so so to see them swallowed, it feels like anything is possible. More, I mean, it always was, but yeah, it's a certain kind of it adds a certain kind of instability. Well, that is reflected in prices right now for sure.
When things like this happen, like, the source I would probably want to go to would be like JournoDAO, right? I would like want to see JournoDAO weigh in because of the different DAOs that you guys are a part of, and, like, I guess Bankless and Backland, and, you know, there's so many sources that you guys are a part of. So of course I just would, I mean, I would love to know, but like that, I mean, I wonder if people feel that same way when they think about it, but because it's,
Well, we've just
these are
been
where the
talking
intelligence.
about, yeah, I mean, we've just been talking about discontinuing the Twitter Spaces and moving actually to podcasts. So yeah, that might be, it might, yeah, I mean, I could see like a more timely topic podcast making a certain amount of sense. If
Without having to do all the writing.
right, yeah, and if we could trick somebody into producing that. Is Eureka John still at work? I don't know. We had to jump off. Yeah,
So
but yeah, it's something I'd be interested in.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that was it.
I find it very interesting that somewhere in there's also Justin Sun buying Huobi, which SBF was also rumored to be a part of, but nobody knows for sure. There seems to be a major, like, these are major shifts that I would love people to be covering that don't work for those companies, because most of the information I get about these topics is months old from when I last researched Alameda Research and FTX, or when I last looked at Binance. Like this week, I looked at Binance and Iran-based exchanges like Nobitex, because it had been reported by that one journalist from CoinDesk, and there's nobody else I know who's covering that content. And when I reviewed what he did, he made a lot of mistakes. His analysis was weak. He attributed $8 billion to Iran exchanges, have like money flow between some Iran-based exchanges and Binance. He said $8 billion. When I looked at the data that he had printed in his report, links to a Google Doc, and you can go through and review the transaction hashes. There's a lot more money there than what he reported. He just didn't know how to read it. Like, it was so basic. So I'm meeting with him on Friday to talk about that. But that's kind of, that's the best there is that guy, Angus Berwick.
All right, I'm looking
I
at
get
that.
the sense CoinDesk is not doesn't have like an investigative arm or expertise, and so they're more about the scoops of what happened, so that it doesn't really make sense for them to like do these sort of like larger piecing together everything. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's as much fire there as there is smoke, but you know, we're basically at economic and informational warfare with China, and so this everything that happened today has to do with both, and it's hard to like, I don't know, write it off as just a coincidence. I'm sure like it wasn't orchestrated to any person's satisfaction, but I think there's a lot of forces pushing in a certain direction, and eventually things fall over.
I do think the stuff I've been talking about with Binance for quite a while now, there's a reason for that. It's very clear to me that there is a correlation there, that this has been going on for a while, and putting all the pieces together requires a bigger information network, so that you can get some where the on-chain sources fail. You need to be able to fill in those gaps to get like a full take on what's going on, at least when you're looking at something as big as FTX and Alameda Research and Binance.
I mean, one of the skill sets that you guys have as journalists is to interview, and just bringing in guests to ask the right questions is really a powerful way to alleviate like the actual workload that is in front of, without the pay. So then it's actually like Eric, you could probably come up with like 5 questions to ask before in like probably 2 minutes of this top of your brain. I mean, Nick, for sure you could, and everyone else. But like, yeah, I just feel like, those are like really easier things to do during this down market when there's not funds coming in, to keep it going and to keep your voice there, without having to have an opinion, but just to ask ask good questions, That's so key.
Yeah, is this Nick, this guy Angus Berwick writes for Reuters, is that the guy?
Sorry, yeah, Reuters, not CoinDesk. I'm thinking of there's like 4 people I know that are reporting on-chain data as stories, and that's Danny Nelson at CoinDesk, Angus Berwick at Reuters. Tom Wilson's the other guy that's at Reuters. Sorry, I'm doing this from my car today.
Wait, can you tell me the names again so I can look them up?
Tom Wilson and Angus Berwick at Reuters, Danny Nelson at CoinDesk.
Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, for this kind of stuff, takes a fair amount of research just to know the right questions to ask, actually.
Really? I wasn't aware of that. Yeah, sorry about that.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be able to sit down cold to an interview like if we were to like invite this even the journalist on. I mean, yeah, to some extent you could wing it off of just reading his article. That could be done. It doesn't add a ton of value, I don't think, but it's in a world where there was more bandwidth, it would make sense.
That's why for me, it's just having too much time in my hands. I think that's definitely a part of it.
Is that you have too much time on your hands?
Yeah, I think well, having current information about all these different pieces and extrapolating something out of it, I think that's really, you need to live on the internet for a little bit to kind of get that. I mean, depending on the thing you want to talk about, how complicated it is.
Right.
I didn't even mention that one of the things like Angus Berwick said in his article about Binance, he published something this week about Tron being like the main source of traffic for that that sanctions evasion. Like it was happening through Tron. That's what they were alleging, which we know is Justin Sun's first baby, Like they didn't even cover Huobi Global and Binance yet, as far as I know.
Well, so like we were talking earlier about, like I said, getting rid of the weekly Twitter Spaces, which we've already kind of paused, moving into podcasts, and so I mean, it brings up an interesting question of like, what would the focus of a podcast be? Because I mean, we kind of have like these multiple directions that we've taken with like the Twitter Spaces and stuff. So there's, and even these town halls, there's like the the journalism meets Web3 stuff. Then there's also kind of like the like impact DAO world stuff that we end up talking about, and then there's this, like the just crypto news sort of thing. And it's kind of like, is there a space where like three of those meet that like makes sense to like begin to structure a theme for a podcast around?
Why don't you call it unstructured
Unstructured.
and actually just
what
bring,
we want to talk about. The sign.
well, that's your style, right? And just bring in the right people in the room
Mhm.
around current topics. I'm just saying, if that's your style and you have a lot of amazing people in the space, then everybody can weigh in. I don't know. I'm just giving you an idea. I'm trying to think about ways that you can just not have to do much work.
Yeah,
and
me too.
actually-
That's why I'm at the same place.
and just show up and that be enough. I mean, I'm just,
Yeah, I appreciate that.
I don't know. I think it would be interesting to just bring somebody on that has, if you decided that you were comfortable with what somebody, I'm thinking about other people and myself who have better niches. Like I'll use a bad example. If Zach XBT was willing to like come on and do a podcast, you'd be like, okay, what's something that you think, but you haven't had time to go into it and tell me what you think about it, and then you try to translate what he's saying into,
That's good.
more versions of his rambling insight. I think that could be interesting, but that's me, like that's my interest. Because otherwise you have to do the work yourself on both ends. Normal, like if you're doing an interview where you already kind of have an idea of what the interview should look like, it's very different in what you prepare for than if you're kind of mining the person's brain and then trying to keep them on track. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, the old what are you working on now is always a great, what are you working on that you haven't shared yet is always a great conversation starter for that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think so.
well, it was nice to see you guys. I'm actually gonna get going, but sorry I've been absent and just, I really had to focus on my stuff and I really appreciate that. Wow.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining. Glad to hear your voice again.
All right, you guys have a wonderful day. See you soon.
All right, see ya. Maybe we can go ahead and call it there then. Good to hear from you, Nick.
Yep, anytime.
Later.